So, as you all know, and I know you all have been excited about this finale part of implant sessions, we have in the last few weeks been able to cover this power series in about 4 parts, and today is the fourth part where we will be wrapping around and talking about the maintenance and where the general dentist actually come in and what's the role of general dentistry. As you all know, you're preparing for this Australian Dental Council exam. This is a general dentist based exam. So we know that implants are mostly specialized in terms of either periodontist, oral surgeons, prosthodontist involved, while the planning of the surgical part, restorative part of giving implants to the patient. But as now over the years the implants failing and failed implants are also getting observed and diseases of implants are also getting understood, the role of general dentist in maintaining the implants, early identity of the disease of implants, and giving some maintenance and care and early prevention is extremely important. So the role of general dentist is getting more and more important, and that is why you have seen that getting reflected in terms of examination questions. How in the last 10 years, if you have been following the past papers also, you must have seen, or you have taken the examination in the 3 years before sessions, or however your friends may have told you about a situation that what kind of questions relate. You all must have noticed the shift in the paradigm of the level of implant questions. Can I ask you this question here that you have that awareness how the implant levels and implant questions and the conceptual levels have increased in the examination? Initially, very basic level of examination questions were asked related to implants, something related to maybe tight crowns, maybe just correcting the proximal contacts, high points, that's all. Now you have seen the shift of implants, then the shift happened towards the peri-implantitis, perimucositis. The therapeutic guidelines, in fact, from the 2012 to the 2019 version, added a chapter on peri-implantitis and perimucositis. We all appreciate that. We all are aware of that. So we understand how it is becoming more and more integral part of the general dentistry. So understanding perimucositis, peri-implantitis, other than initial restorative challenges or your high points, that shift happened. Now, in the September 24 examination, you got asked about different kinds of attachments in the lower overdentures. So implant-supported overdentures, attachments, and challenges around them, the dexterity of the patients, residential care patients. So in the last 3 sessions, I gave you the full equipped knowledge and concepts about how to answer those questions, how to see and then know what kind of attachment that is, what kind of challenges can be faced, even during the planning phase, what are the various aspects and concepts of implants that you can apply. And you have seen that in the examination recently, as you know, that only aging population questions are getting emphasized, where patients who are in residential care facilities have lack of dexterity or maybe are reliant on external oral hygiene help. They also sometimes choose to get implants, and we did in the last session about the aging population and choices of implants in them. So if you have still not watched any of my 4 part series part, then please go to the YouTube channel or our Facebook page, and you know that all the 3 parts are there. So whenever you are summarizing this entire implant situation for the exam, all these 4 parts will cover you and give you the actual exam concepts which you can apply into the real-time examination questions. So to summarize in today's class, I will be talking about the maintenance part, identifying the disease, and then how as a general dentist you can manage them. So far we have been choosing the options of referral to the specialist whenever we see the peri-implantitis or perimucositis option. And that would be a good thing to do as well whenever given as a choice. But as implants are becoming a regular part of patients' life and is becoming a very commonly chosen treatment in patients, especially in Australia and even in residential care facilities, it is difficult to make referrals to the specialists, especially for the patients who are aged, who are in the facilities. And as a general dentist, you would be going and giving them the visits. So, as you also know, specialist referrals are also tough. So, sometimes when the specialist referral option is eliminated from the options, then also you must know the basic management of periimplantitis and perimucositis according to the given probing depths. Do you want to learn that concept today? I'll give you 3 case studies as well. You will see all those 3 different case studies actually can be the 3 SBQs history in the examination. So we will dive into those case histories just like they were given in the exam. And if the option of referral to the specialist was not provided, then what should be your ideal choice of the answers? Do you want to solve all those questions and get the strong, confident answers to all these questions that I just gave you? And when they come in the examination, how to make a diagnosis? What are your investigations that you would perform to come to a diagnosis? So, information gathering cluster. Then what is the final diagnosis upon making those investigations? So diagnosis and management planning cluster. And then what treatment you would provide other than referral to the specialist. If that option is not provided, that is your treatment and evaluation cluster. And then for the home care and maintenance, what should you do and what should you advise? And that's your professionalism and health promotion cluster. So in today's class, as we summarize this implant power session series, I will give you all the 4 clusters around the implant diseases and doing all these 4 clusters concepts, real exam concepts applied to your real examination questions. So give me a big yes if you're ready to learn all of it and even more. All right. Good to see the enthusiasm. And it's a very short and lovely Australian Dental Journal article. Again, you know my love for Australian Dental Journals and its articles because they're so beautiful. They're so beautifully compiled and they are much beyond the textbooks. I mean, you may spend weeks on textbooks and then you would get that information, what a journal, an article gives you in an hour. So the beauty, and so I'm so grateful for these, first of all, that they give us the condensed knowledge at our palms. So let's start with discussing of these implants maintenance, care and treatment of peri-implant disease and infection, starting with your identification, right? And then diagnosis, all the investigations that you would perform to make the diagnosis, and then treatment, and then your home care advices and health promotional advices to the patient. So it's a very important and a repeated pattern concept. Please make sure today's class is extremely important because this is exactly what you will see on your examination screens. So the more focused you are in today's class, in the examination, the more accurately you land on the questions. And you will see that sometimes you have already been looking at those history in your past papers, but you never had that perspective to look and identify that. Today, the concepts you learn, the moment you see the history, immediately the concepts will start coming to you. That's the level of preparation it will take you to. All right. So first of all, you know that more and more implants are being given in the patients and higher survival rates are also achieved. But still there are diseases around implants which are still present, and that really comes with identification and management. So usually the specialist would be giving the implants planning the restorations, deciding what kind of torque, if you're giving a screwed one, cemented, all that kind of complex planning is done by the specialists. Where the implants may be given, the grafts are required or not, what is the bone quality, what is the bone quantity, the thickness of the bone, the width of the bone, everything is the oral surgeon expertise, periodontist expertise, or your prosthodontist when you're planning what kind of restorations would be given, what kind of occlusal load can be given on the implants, right? So although this is all specialized zone, but the importance of general dentists is increasing and becoming more common for the maintenance of these implants. A similar avenue opens up in the examination actually, where the orthodontic treatment initial screening is also being done by general dentist. This is an implant scenario managed mostly by your specialist when the giving of implant is concerned. But again, for the maintenance part later, the general dentist plays a huge role. As you have seen, even in perio, right? That is one discipline. The screening is done by general dentists. That's why you know in the examination why staging and grading and basic periodontal examination scores, they are given so much weightage and relevance. Yes, so you have to see this why ADC is asking you those questions. Instead of, oh my God, a lot of staging and grading is getting asked, you must get aware that when I start practicing in Australia, as a general dentist, it's my responsibility to screen the patients, identify the disease, and then make timely referrals. So perio, we know that as a general dentist, we have been making referrals, and we as a general dentist have been screening them. We have been doing that in our countries as well, wherever we have been practicing. So similarly, now in the Australian dental trends, for the orthodontics referral also, general dentist related questions are getting increased. A similar trend is being seen in ADC for ortho identification questions. Have you seen the missing centrals, the missing laterals, the missing canines, impacted canines, deep bites in the mixed dentition stage? Those kind of questions are starting to get even more and more in number, and the concept difficulty is also getting increased. And if you were enrolled with me, you know we have done that article as well, where the screening of the, all the three possible missing or impacted permanent teeth and what the role of general dentist is, right? So those are, even in Australian Dental Journal, those concepts are making more appearances. There are latest guidelines to follow, and same thing is getting reflected in the examination, right? So as a general dentist, they are going to test you for all the disciplines basically. So similarly here for implants, it may be given by the specialist, but the general dentist role is getting extremely more and more prominent to identify the disease and then manage it as well. So first of all, what is the implant failure and what are the signs and symptoms? How will you, when you look in the patient's mouth, you will tell that it is a failing or a failed implant. We talked about that also in the previous session. So what is the ailing implant, failed implant, or all those kinds of classifications. So there can be different challenges that implants can show in the mouth. It can be the prosthodontic component instability. The restoration itself can be a challenge. It can be unstable, it can be loose. And in the examination, we have been getting the loose prosthesis on implants kind of SBQ. Whether it's an FPD on the implant or it's a single crown, screw retained or cemented, the loose prosthesis questions are coming up. And then management and flossing under it, all these questions are coming. Today, I'm going to also tell you what kind of floss to choose in what kind of implant. You want to, I'm sure, learn about that as well. Other than that, either your prosthesis can be mobile or your implant can be mobile. Then there can be occlusal trauma. There can be fractured components, pain, inflammation, infection, or even neuropathy. So the failure of implants can be in the early stages or at the late stages, depending upon if it is immediately after placement of the implant where osseointegration never really happened. That's an early failure implant. So that means a lack or a failure of achieving osteointegration. Whereas a late failure means where the osteointegration was successfully achieved, but then because of the presence of inflammatory disease around the supporting tissues, now the implant is failing or undergoing failure. So everybody understood number one concept, early failure, where the osseointegration never really happened. And that's due to mostly surgical errors or prosthodontic challenges. In today's class, we're talking about the peri-implantitis, peri-mucositis, the supporting tissue disease, which is the late failure, which is actually getting asked in the examination. Because your early failure would be identified by the specialist during the follow-up phase. It's the late failure that a general dentist will come in close contact with as the patient comes after months or years of follow up. Clear for everybody? The early and the late failure, number one concept. I'm going to be giving you a quiz in maybe tomorrow to test all your concepts. So make sure you're getting all the concepts and please put your question on the chat if you still have any. So early and the late failure, number one concept to learn. I hope that's clear for everyone. Now, some kind of late failures can also be associated with occlusal overload, but usually that's really less in proportion. Occlusal overload initially only will show you the challenges. So the late failures will mostly be around the peri-implant disease or infection. So what are the causative factors for your peri-implant disease? So peri-implant disease is classified as peri-implant mucositis and peri-implantitis depending upon its severity. If you were to look for its counterpart in your healthy gingiva, it would be gingivitis and periodontitis. So peri-implant mucositis is the implant counterpart of your healthy gingiva's gingivitis, and peri-implantitis is the counterpart of your healthy normal gingiva's periodontitis. So peri-implant mucositis is reversible, just like your gingivitis, and it is just confined to the soft tissues around the implant. It does not involve the bone. Number one. Then peri-implantitis is present and the soft tissue will be involved too, along with the signs of bone involvement, which would be in the form of bone loss, right? So number one present factor which is required to make a diagnosis of peri-implantitis is the loss of supporting bone. Now, some bone loss in the initial year is not natural. After that, there is a baseline amount of bone that must be lost. More than that would be required, would be defined as peri-implantitis. That's why the baseline level of the bone is the most crucial requirement as an information gathering, as your important previous record to make the comparison between the current level of bone, because there can be deep seated implants, there can be superficial implants. So amount of bone surrounding the implant by just one point in time, one moment in time, cannot be used to make the diagnosis of peri-implantitis. In that situation, in certain situations, yes, you can have one point in time x-ray and tell there is a peri-implantitis when there is specific infrabony or a vertical bone loss. Because vertically, if it's a healthy osteointegrated implant, it would always be closely around the implant. But if you don't have a baseline record and you see a vertical notch, everyone remembers the vertical bone loss or an angular bone loss related to your natural teeth. Everyone has seen that. Everybody remembers that. The vertical notching or infrabony pocket that you used to call, right? Which is seen with, can anybody tell on the chat what you see with the vertical bone loss in your healthy teeth? You see that with your food impactions. You see that with your trauma from occlusion, right? So those are your, and you can see that with your overhanging restorations as well. So restorative challenges leading to your periodontal situations, aggressive periodontitis, right? So these are certain situations where you see vertical bone loss or an angular bone loss. So sometimes when you don't have a previous record and there is no horizontal bone loss, you can't tell what was the previous level of the bone and what is now the level of bone. In that case, if you see a clear-cut vertical loss of bone around the implant, that is also an indicator of a failing implant or peri-implantitis, right? Where the osseointegration is getting lost. So the microorganisms, the pathogenic bacteria, which leads to peri-implantitis or peri-implant mucositis, they're exactly the same as you would see in your gingivitis and periodontitis disease. The researches have been done. Although there is no natural pocket here or sulcus here. So here the microorganism is derived from your saliva or the adjacent teeth pocket. So if your adjacent teeth pocket are actually harboring the pathogenic bacteria, there is a high likelihood that if you place implant in the closer proximity, the bacteria will migrate into the implant tissues and can cause the pathogenesis. So that is why removal of the periodontal disease before giving an implant is extremely crucial. That is why in the patient related factor article from the first class, if you remember, of the implant session, that existing perio disease is also a risk factor. Previous history of tooth loss because of the periodontitis is also a risk factor, because that indicates that the patient is prone to have the pathogenic bacteria in the saliva, in the crevices and the sulcus. Everybody understood another crucial important, I would say, of where the pathogenic bacteria is coming from and why removal of the perio disease before giving the implants is important. Understood? Right. So now all the accumulation of plaque around implants can lead to peri-implant mucositis, as you have learned why the pathogenic bacteria is same around gingivitis and peri-implant mucositis. What are the signs and symptoms that would help you identify the peri-implantitis? So the radiological evidence of bone loss is the number one criteria that makes your diagnosis as peri-implantitis. Without the bone loss, you cannot make 100% peri-implantitis diagnosis, even when suppuration may be present. Clear for everyone? So if I give you bleeding and suppuration but no bone loss, can you choose your diagnosis as peri-implantitis? Yes or no, please on the chat. Absolutely not. You cannot. So the bone loss evidence, either in the vertical form or in the horizontal form, is crucial to make the diagnosis. Now, the defects can be saucer shaped, it can be your vertical defects, angular bone loss, it can be horizontal bone loss where the more threads of implants are getting exposed and you have a previous baseline x-ray. And from the newer x-ray, you're seeing, yes, the bone is getting more lost. How will you tell the bone is getting lost? More threads will start getting exposed. So you need to have one landmark on the implant set while taking the baseline record. And then when you take maybe after an year another x-ray, the same landmark will be used to gauge where the bone has gone now. Yes or no, please? Is that crucial? So you need to use a landmark on the implant to compare the level of the bone on the baseline x-ray and on the current date x-ray. And as more threads get exposed over the years, it is indicating bone loss, right? So what yearly loss of 0.02 mm is normal. Anything more than that is considered your subsequent and more relevant bone loss, enough to categorize it as peri-implantitis. In the first year alone, up to 1 to 1.5 mm is lost. That is the highest amount of bone loss, which is in the first year of giving implant. Post that, 0.02 mm is your annual allowed normal turnover bone loss. All right, about your doubt zone, I will come to that question. Right now, let's talk about the bone findings and the amount of bone loss which is normal. I will talk about the probing depths also in a while. So the bone loss values are clear for everyone. It's 0.02, Zara, Richa. 0.02, 0.2 mm per year would be 0.02 to 0.15 mm is your average annual allowed bone loss. Okay, so it's a range, but 0.02 is what you would find in majority of the references. Now, for the diagnosis, you must carefully differentiate it from your mucositis. Primary failures to achieve the tissue integration and lacking an inflammatory component. So basically what it means is there can be other reasons for the loss of bone around the implant as well. It can be due to the abnormal morphology. It could be your hypoplastic responses of the gingiva. So that means increased probing depths can be seen, but there would be no bone loss, right? And maybe the tissue morphology was abnormal. That's why some recession happened, but it was not an actual bone loss around implant, right? And or it could be the recession due to surgical trauma. So you must learn to distinguish between the recession due to tissue morphology, hyperplastic gingival growth, or your surgical trauma related recessions. How will you differentiate these things? The baseline x-ray and your current date x-ray, and the using the landmark and knowing the level of the bone, and having a fixed dedicated landmark and knowing the level of the bone. Is that correct? 100% when you get recession around the implants, either it could be due to true bone loss, or it could be due to the abnormal gingival morphology or your surgical trauma or gingival overgrowths. All that has to be ruled out before you make the diagnosis of peri-implantitis by understanding and observing the levels of the bone around the implant. Am I making myself fully clear here? Because this is in the examination where you get confused in choosing your diagnosis. So the parameters which you will be assessing to make the diagnosis would be your bleeding on probing, peri-implant probing for the probing depths, suppuration, mobility, then the radiography, because radiography is basically what will tell you the amount of bone loss, and then the microbiology. Of course, microbiology is not routinely used, but when done, it was found that in the flora around it is same you're associated with your periodontitis. So same pathogenic, anaerobic, pathogenic bacteria, which leads to your periodontitis. Same bacteria is present for peri-implant disease. So the most important ones are probing depths, suppuration, bleeding on probing, and bone loss. Why not mobility? Is mobility a more important indicator of the disease? No, mobility is the last stage of the disease. In fact, it's become a non-savable situation. Is that correct? That is why mobility is the last thing that you would be very worried about, because once it is present, the other criterias don't make any sense. It is a failed implant. Mobility is an indicator of the failed implant. So we are looking to identify the disease before the implant becomes mobile. Is that correct? Yes or no, please? We are looking to identify the disease before it becomes mobile so it can be saved. That means if there are deep probing depths, bleeding on probing present, suppuration present, and bone loss is happening, which is excessive to 0.02 mm per year, in that case, arrest it now so that it doesn't become a failed implant requiring extraction or removal, right? That's why mobility is what you are trying to avoid and prevent. So swelling and redness of your peri-implant mucosa is seen also in perimucositis. So what are now let's talk about information gathering cluster. Question will start. These are the findings. What kind of investigations will help you identify and diagnose the disease? The first one to do is the peri-implant probing. So for certain implants, having the pocket depth 3 to 3.5 is really normal. It wouldn't like a normal healthy gingival sulcus will have shallower probing depths like 1 or 2 mm or 2.5 mm. So for an implant, it's natural to have deeper probing depths to begin with. At least 3 to 3.5 are your general healthy implant sulcus. Even up to 5 to 6 mm can be associated with health, especially if they are deep seated implants. So, when your implants are deep seated, deeply submerged, they will also have increased probing depths. So, 5 is written here, but up to 6 also. Up to 6 mm also can be associated without any bone loss, right? And without any bleeding on probing. Even in the history, if it's giving you 6 mm, no bleeding, no bone loss, would you identify it as a disease? Well, it could be hyperplastic gingivitis, right? Or peri-implant mucositis. It can be hyperplastic response, and a general antiseptic cleansing or mouth rinse will help subside that inflammation, right? Clear for everyone? So anything where the probing depth is greater than 5 mm, so when it's 6, usually that would be your hyperplastic gingivitis if no bone loss is seen, and it would most likely have bleeding on probing as positive, and your management would be just giving an anti-inflammatory mouth rinses, which is chlorhexidine, right? Very, very crucial concept. Zoom, you asked me this concept above about 6 mm, 7 mm, or 8 mm. Please know without bone loss, alone deep probing depth still doesn't mean peri-implantitis. It would still remain in peri-implant mucositis if it is also present with bleeding on probing. Clear for everyone? Right? So in deeper pockets, now advice is you should not create deeper pockets over 5 mm around implants, even when you're giving deeply submerged implants. Does that make sense? It's a very good point to ponder. Do not give pockets greater than 5 mm around implants. Why? They're difficult to cleanse and they will harbor microorganism which is pathogenic. So even if it's not peri-implantitis yet, you're making it prone to get it. Does that make sense? Yes or no is very important thing to learn, right? As a general dentist, so even if you have 6 to 7 mm pocket depth, you don't have an existing disease, would you just, rub it off and say, okay, let it be? Or would you manage it with your antiseptic rinses and reduce the gingiva and consider it as an hyperplastic response and not try to avoid such deeper pockets because they are difficult to maintain and clean even at home care by patients, and they harbor pathogenic bacteria, right? And they can be confused with peri-implantitis. So they can be confused with, but they are not. But they can lead to, because if they start harboring periodontal pathogenic bacteria. What kind of probe would you use? So would you use a metal probe around implant? No, absolutely not. You will use a plastic rigid probe, which is ideal to probe the sulcus with a blunt, straight periodontal plastic probe, allowing for the assessment of the peri-implant probing depths, right? So this is your probing depth. It could be your true peri-implantitis due to bone loss. It could be due to hyperplastic. It could be reduced probing, but still bone loss is seen if it is associated with recession, just like your natural teeth. Is that correct? So your probing depth could still be 4 mm, which you may consider as normal, but because of recession due to bone loss, it is a true peri-implantitis. That means even probing depth, increased probing depth may or may not be seen with your peri-implantitis. The bone loss is the most important factor. 5 mm, Preet, your doubt is that, okay, what is the 5 mm existing formal probing depth? Is sometimes when you give implants which are submerged within the bone, they have a greater soft tissue profile around them. So in that case, even 5 mm could be a deep but a normal pocket around it. Anything more than that should be avoided, which can harbor pathogenic bacteria and can lead to disease. Is that clear? Preet, I hope I answered your question. Probing also should be done long term when you call the patient for your regular recall appointments, and the recall appointments should be done as you would do for periodontal situations, right? In the initial stage of treatment, 1 month, and then in 3 months. Now, for bleeding on probing, it's an important indicator of inflammation. So, it is not an accurate, reliable predictor for the progression of the disease, but it tells you how stable it is. So, sometimes you may have administered the treatment, but still is it bleeding, which indicates an active inflammation. That means the patient is not keeping up with the home care or oral hygiene. So it's more of an indicator of your surrounding inflammation rather than how rapidly the disease is progressing. Suppuration also may or may not be present. It can be present even with your peri-implant mucositis without peri-implantitis if bone loss is not present. So it just means that it is associated with infection, but usually as along with your bone loss, it would mean peri-implantitis. For the mobility part, again, mobility, lack, anything where the mobility in the implant is seen, it would mean that there is a clear lack of osseointegration. And absolutely, it indicates that it's the final stage of lack of osseointegration. The implants usually go for removal. So definitely it's a failed implant, and it would be present in the late stages of peri-implantitis for sure. Now, radiography is the most important, and the distance from the implant shoulder to the alveolar bone crest is a reliable parameter, providing the radiographs are standardized. So, how do you standardize your radiograph? By using your landmark, clear landmark, and then using that landmark in consequent appointments to evaluate the remaining bone. Okay? So mobility would be seen with in the early failure also you can see mobility, but that would be due to surgical errors or prosthodontic loading errors. Is that clear, Zoom? So early mobility can be also seen, which means the osseointegration never really happened. And in the late stages, mobility would mean that implant was successfully osseointegrated, but because of the disease, it progressed, and no maintenance and care and treatment was provided. So it failed and it lost all its osseointegration and became mobile. So clear for everyone how mobility can be as a part of early failure or late failure, both. The reasons and etiologies would be different. Okay, so these are your factors on the basis of which you would assess your implant. Now let's summarize it. Increased probing depth may or may not be present with peri-implant mucositis, right? It because there can be recession also, right? Because of the abnormal gingival morphology. So because of that, it may or may not be present. In peri-implantitis, it is present. Bleeding on probing is present also in both because peri-implantitis, which is not treated, would be actively infected and inflamed site. Suppuration is also present in both. Mobility would be not present in mucositis because that's just soft tissue inflammation, whereas in peri-implantitis, it may or may not be present depending upon the early stage or late stage. And radiographic bone loss, therefore, is the only factor which would be absolutely missing. So mobility and radiographic bone loss are the two factors which will be always missing with mucositis. Rest may or may not be present and would always be present with peri-implantitis. So your final diagnosis of peri-implantitis is coming from only two factors which must be present, either mobility or radiographic bone loss. Is that seal? Let's seal that deal or not? Like 100% get that concept and look for this keyword in the histories, bone loss and mobility, because we have done these questions in your ultimate advance file, and a lot of time the deeper probing depths were given, but there was no bone loss, no mobility, and we have chosen peri-implant mucositis. Anyone remembers that? 6 mm, 7 mm, we've seen those questions, right? So this is why I'm clarifying this concept once for all, that please make sure that getting these any of these two positives in the history is crucial to make the diagnosis of peri-implantitis. Okay? Now, this was about your information gathering, processing all the findings, and making a diagnosis. Two clusters covered, crystal clear for everyone. Information gathering, diagnosis, and management of the peri-implant disease. Now, are you ready for the maintenance care and treatment, which would be your treatment and evaluation and your professionalism and health promotion cluster? So be ready for a quiz as well. I'm going to be testing you all in all these four clusters tomorrow. Okay? Now, first of all, there are two factors involved. One is your chairside treatment that you would do in the clinic, and other would be your health promotion and professionalism cluster, which you would do as your patient motivation and patient programming and training for the oral hygiene maintenance around the implants. And the questions are coming: where to choose super floss, where to choose interdental brushes, where to choose your regular floss. Is there a lot of cloudedness around it? Still confusions around it? I have been asking you those questions on subject wise mocks, public mocks here and there. So I ninja mocks as well. But still every time there is still some thin confusion that still comes up and you're like, okay, where to choose what? So today I will tell you crystal clear what kind of prosthesis it is, what are the numbers of prosthetic components, what to choose, right? If there is mobility and no bone loss, it is still an indicator of peri-implantitis and failed implant. So maybe there would not be bone loss visible on the X-ray yet, but if it's mobile, that means the osseointegration has been lost or was never achieved, depending on the early stage or the late stage. Clear for you, Zoom? Good question, but I hope it's clear. But usually it would be associated with radiography and radiographic changes. But in case it's not, that means it's just not reflecting on radiograph yet. But that means the osseointegration is lost. Now, coming back to our treatment and the maintenance and professionalism and health promotion phase. So there are two components which will go hand in hand. The professionalism and health promotion would be for the home care, and the treatment and evaluation cluster questions would be what you do in the clinic for the patient. Both kind of questions will be there and definitely be asked. So your health promotion component is extremely important by educating and motivating the patient to achieve optimum oral hygiene, the devices and tools to use to maintain. So you can't simply let the patient go by say twice brushing and bye-bye. You can't say that. You have to give them the interdental cleaning devices, the sulcular and the probing depth, the gingival sulcus cleaning devices so that the assurance of implant health is maintained. A maintenance program should be undertaken after successful implant therapy. So it is an important integral step in your professionalism and health promotion cluster to educate the patient and program them and give them a fully understanding of their home care maintenance. Even at the recall visits, you must check and evaluate whether they are performing it. How will you perform? How will you check and evaluate? By again taking your probing depths, taking your bleeding on probing in indices, and your plaque load and everything. These are your basic clinical indices that will help you assess whether the patient is maintaining their oral hygiene, how motivated they are, and if you gave them the treatment for a particular site, are they maintaining and stabilizing it? So what is the best indicator of stability? I gave you that concept few minutes ago. The best indicator of stability, question gets asked in the exam all the time, is bleeding on probing, right? Wonderful. Everybody gets it. Only few people wrote it, so I know some of you have gotten it, but everybody gets it. It's a direct question in the examination. Even with periodontitis, we have done the stabilizing criterias. Everyone, remember that in the class. So stability criteria is asked for implant disease also and for periodontitis, natural teeth also. Must remember that criteria, okay? Now, I've given you the stability article also on the drive. Please make sure you remember all the stability stages and the criteria involved. And I have tested you on the mock as well, and might be also asking you in the grand mock also on the stability criteria on the periodontitis. So on the maintenance appointments, you will check for the probing depths, you will check for the margin position, you will take radiographic bone levels. Everything should be tested on the maintenance appointment. So these are your professionalism and health promotion for home care, and treatment and evaluation where the recall and the assessment examination questions are asked. Now, this is one table which helps you understand the treatment and summarize it, where the peri-implant pocket is 3 mm or greater than 3 mm, and then yeah, this one is 3 mm and greater than 3 mm. This is another international criteria of 3 mm, then 4 to 5 mm, and then 5 mm. This is a better management chart. So I'm going to be talking about this one rather than this one alone, because it does cover the 3 mm and greater than 3 mm, but it also talks about greater than 5 mm. So when I summarize the protocol, the international protocol followed worldwide, this is the protocol. I'm going to be talking about this, but let's talk about it. That if your your referral to specialist is not given, you must know at what stage you will do only rinses, where you would do periodontal debridement, and where resective or surgical management would be chosen. Because even without giving referral to specialist, ADC is sometimes still asking you what is an ideal treatment for this situation. So you may not be even doing it, but ADC requires you to know the management. Is that right? Same goes for, remember, ameloblastoma questions, OKC questions, big tumors, whatever you may have, cysts, where you're choosing your curettage, marsupialization, or resection. These are your kind of questions that ADC is still asking, you know. Even without making referral as a general dentist, you must know the ideal treatment choices for even complicated problems, because you will let the patients know. Absolutely correct, Bhargavi. You have to educate the patient about what is required. Clear? And also, you will make the referral accordingly, right? And sometimes mechanical debridement is now, as a general dentist, you may administer also. You may not have to refer immediately to periodontist. Yes, for resective surgeries and regenerative surgeries, definitely a specialist referral would be needed. But where there is only antiseptic cleansing, prescribing the mouthwashes, or mechanical debridement, they can be done by general dentists. So we will learn these criteria based on the probing depth, the basic difference between these no treatment, debridement, mouth rinses, or systemic or local antibiotic therapy combined with resective surgeries is the probing depth. Clear for everyone? What is your basic difference? Because imagine if your pocket was 6 mm but no bone loss, right? So that is just your mucositis and gingival overgrowth. Simply, you don't even have to do any gingivectomy or any removal of excessive gingiva. Simply, mouth rinses will cause to the reduction in the depth. Clear for everyone? Yes or no's, please? So even if you have 6 mm, right? All right. So let's see what is the treatment that you may give. So if there is no bone loss present, you would assess for plaque and bleeding. In the absence of both, nothing would be required. Suppose there is a 5 to 6 mm probing depth, but there may not be any plaque, any bleeding, right? But it's 6 mm. So still, you would at least apply the mouth rinse part. Why? Because there is still some gingival growth, hyperplastic growth, where right now it may be stable, but it is still present. Because bleeding is not present, so it may be still stable. Patient may be maintaining oral hygiene around that time, so bleeding may be minimal. But still, mouth rinses and chlorhexidine may be advised to reduce that increased probing depth, because do we want that increased probing depth? Grishma, I can't look at the MCQ right now and answer that question, right? So please let's keep that at the end or send me on my WhatsApp. If it's a conceptual doubt, you can ask, right? Okay, so don't send me the SBQs right now to solve middle of the class. That you send me on the WhatsApp and we'll discuss that. So my concept here is if you have a 6 mm probing depth pocket, no bleeding, no plaque, what should be your management? No treatment, mouth rinses, or throw in gingival surgery? Choose one. You give me A, B, or C. It's a 6 mm probing depth, mouth rinses, antiseptic, anti-inflammatory, no treatment, or your periodebridement compare along with your gingival surgery, right? Because if there is no plaque load, debridement would not help. Is that correct? If there is no plaque or calculus present, would you require to do debridement and unnecessarily disturb the fibers around the implant? No. But there is a 6 mm pocket, which is a hindrance in maintaining the oral hygiene at home. So definitely give your mouth rinses to reduce inflammation and reduce the probing depths. So probing depth of 4 or 5 mm may be caused by tissue swelling and can often be corrected by improvement of peri-implant plaque control. When you have pus or pocket depths which are greater than 5 mm, that means a 6 mm or a 7 mm, it would require additional measures like antiseptics including 2% chlorhexidine or 3% hydrogen peroxide, right? And sometimes local or systemic antibiotics may or may not be considered. But as a general dentist, you do not advise the systemic antibiotics. Okay? Now, for your peri-implantitis, where you have associated bone loss, in that case, as per the protocol, when you have bone loss, the treatment includes oral hygiene instructions, debridement, surgical resections, topical antiseptic treatments, local antibiotic delivery, systemic antibiotic delivery. These are the combinations, and these will be done by the specialist, especially the antibiotic part and the surgical resection part. Debridement and mouth rinses you can do. Antibiotics and surgical resections is the specialist component. So when the bone loss is there, in the initial management, you can do the debridement and start the mouth rinses and make the referral for further resections and antibiotic delivery. Clear for everyone? Is that right for everyone? So what would be your initial management? Have you seen questions like that? Initial management, you can do the debridement, start mouth rinses, but immediately make referral. You will not wait for it to stop because the bone loss is already happening in a moderate to severe level. So surgical resection and systemic antibiotics would be or may be required. Topical antiseptic means mouth rinses, right? Right, Bhargavi? Topical antiseptic use means in the forms of mouthwash, right? Because irrigation is only one point in time that you can do chair side. You can do that. But at home also topical antiseptic treatment is required, right? I think you're confusing it with local antibiotic delivery where you put chlorhexidine gel in the pocket or you may put tetracycline chips, perio chips, right? So that's your local antibiotic drug delivery. And then home topical antiseptic is chlorhexidine or peroxide. Okay? So topically and local delivery are two different situations. Everybody, clear for everyone? Topical antiseptic delivery, which is home use of chlorhexidine or peroxide, whereas local antibiotic delivery is in after surgery or in deep pockets where you put antibiotics around the pockets, within the pockets, right? Clear for everyone? The difference between the two is clear. Local antibiotic delivery and systemic antibiotics is done by specialist. Topical antiseptic advices and prescriptions can be done by general dentist. Distinctly clear and understood? So your systemic antibiotics, this question is getting asked in exam now. Tell me, have you been seeing this question for periodontitis or periimplantitis or no? What would you What drug would you use along with metronidazole? You have different options. It's a direct examination question. So metronidazole can be used alone also, or can be used in combination with amoxicillin. Along with that, you can also use local application of tetracycline fibers, which is the local antibiotic delivery now. So systemically, metronidazole alone or in combination with amox, not amox alone. Okay, Zoom? Not amox alone. Metronidazole alone or metronidazole plus amox. Clav is also not preferred. Metronidazole specially acts on treponeme, palladiums, the spirochetes, and all your anaerobes. Clav is not important here. Metronidazole is your anaerobe gram-negative and spirochetal targeting drug, which can be used either alone or for certain superficial and surface line gram-positive or partial aerobic. Amox can also be used. But amox plus clav is not used because when you put clav in the equation, metronidazole has to go. But metronidazole periodontally is extremely important. So that's why clav is out of the equation here. It's not your mixed infection like your endodontic infection spreading into the facial spaces where you can choose amox plus clav. Got it? So those kind of mixed infections where you have facial infections, there you use amox and clav. But in the perio, even if amox plus clav is given, or metro alone is given, or metro plus amox is given, either metro alone or metro plus amox plus clav is not preferred. Clear for everyone. Put it in a box and remember it. This is an accurate, exact examination question. Okay? Advanced bone loss would require your surgical resections, systemic antibiotics, local delivery of antibiotics, and your full regenerative surgeries. So definitely a referral to the specialist is required. But if that's not given as an option and asked what is the management, then please make sure to choose these treatments. You would know at least what to do. Now here on the left side, you see the pictures. This is the flossing method to use for your single crown implants. So your regular crown can be used around the single implant crown. It's a wraparound method where you insert the implants on both the contacts, then make it cross and then do your swiping motion. So regular flexible floss would be used around single crown. Number one concept. Around your fixed prosthesis, bridge on the implants. Implant supported bridges, you would use your super floss or your interdental brushes. So in single unit implants, you can use your regular floss. In your single unit implants, you can use your regular floss. But if it's a complicated crown anatomy, like if you're given a ridge lap profile, so your regular floss will not go and penetrate around that ridge lap. In that case, you will need a stiffer floss, which is a super floss. So even in single crown case, you may be required to use a super floss, but that is case specific when you have used a ridge lap profile of the crown. Is everyone with me? And does that make full sense? In your regular single crowns with your regular pontic and crown, you do not require super floss. You require the wraparound method with your regular floss. But if the question it gives you ridge lap profile, so it has a complex profile around the soft tissues in which your regular floss cannot penetrate and you need a stiffer floss to go in, you would use the super floss. Direct exam question, and here is your direct answer. Now, in your fixed bridge prosthesis over the implant, regular floss cannot undergo underneath the bridge or not? Yes? So in your fixed bridge over the implants, can your regular floss, can you thread it under the implant? No, right? In that case also, always use your super floss or interdental brushes depending upon the gap present. So where you have larger gaps, you use your interdental brushes. Now remember this question I have given you in one of your ninja mock or subject-wise mock where there was a single implant, but there was a black triangle around it. And the question was asked, what aid would you recommend to your patient? And floss was given and interdental brush was given. Yes, Naveen, absolutely correct. It was one of the subject-wise mock, either perio or prosto. And there it tricked you. So you chose implant, but the gaps were too big to be just cleaned with implants. And that's why interdental brushes were to be chosen. Right? Clear for everyone? Now, in anterior teeth, regular floss. In single crowns, regular floss. But in complicated crown anatomy, super floss. In fixed bridge prosthesis, super floss. In larger areas and black triangles, interdental brushes. Clear for everyone? This is crucial and it is all sorted now. It is simple now or not? Is it simplified for you in the examination? Now, based on single implant, fixed prosthesis, black triangles, ridge lap crowns, you got answer for all these situations. No variable is left. So now let's look at these 3 case studies, which will help you also imagine if this was the question in exam. A 34-year-old male patient came with an implant replacing the upper right central, and it was restored 1 year previously. On presentation, there is a slight swelling, loss of stippling, and 3 mm probing depth. This is the presentation. Now focus. I'm giving you all the information and the keywords. You have to make your diagnosis. So this is slight swelling, loss of stippling, and 3 mm probing depth. Now, if no bone loss was seen on the radiograph, what would be your diagnosis? Peri-implant mucositis. So radiographic examination confirmed there was no loss of crestal bone, on the basis of which a diagnosis of peri-implant mucositis was made. Treatment was carried out, including some debridement, because there was still swelling and plaque if present, then debridement would be done, and with floss and reinforcement of home care methods. Another case was a 55-year-old female, again had a fluctuant swelling on the buccal aspect of 1-5. Swelling had been present for 1 month. There was initial discomfort. And now, about a week after, the crown had been cemented in the place. So it's kind of an early challenge and an early disease. Because if it happened within the week of cementing the crown. Is that correct? Due to an extended trip overseas, she was unable to have the problem attended to until her return. This is the clinical finding now. She has a swelling now. Crown was cemented within a week. This swelling happened and it is also having suppuration. So there is purulent discharge and swelling. Yes, this is the second case, Aurora, right? Oh, sorry. Yeah, this one. The premolar one. After cementing the crown, she got a swelling and she got a purulent discharge. And the associated probing depth was 6 mm. Now 6 mm is greater than 5 mm, so definitely should raise eyebrows and concerns. And on the x-ray, you must expect or notice for specifically for radiographic bone loss because it puts it in the higher risk of peri-implantitis. Now you see here, do you see, compared to your distal aspect of bone around the implant versus the mesial, do you see the angular bone loss classic on the mesial aspect? Can everyone appreciate the classic angular bone loss that we were just talking about? So you see the distal bone levels and the mesial bone levels. So 6 mm 6 mm probing depth, swelling and fluctuant swelling, which is, and associated probing bone loss. What would be your diagnosis? So there was bone loss and there was deep probing depths. Your diagnosis is absolutely peri-implantitis. Wonderful. Everybody made the correct diagnosis now. Now, question asks, what are the etiological factors? In the exam, have you seen that? It was an early implant. It's still not failure, Richa. It would be called failing, but you can still treat it and bring it back to health, right? Because it's not mobile yet. That's why etiological factors could be food impaction, floss impaction, or excessive cement. Clear? These are the possible etiological factors. Now the pocket was debrided, abscess was drained, and a course of antibiotics was prescribed. On reviewing the implant 6 weeks later, complete resolution of abscess were noticed, and peri-implant probing depths were also reduced to 3 mm, which is normal now, and no further treatment was required apart from the routine recall and maintenance care. Yes. If there is excess cement, right, then also it would be within the sulcus only, right, Zoom? I don't know the name. I think you always come by Zoom user and I always ask your name. I think it's Lata. Yes, see, I guessed it before you wrote. So, Lata, you know that, right? That if there is an excessive cement, it would still be above the gingival base, right? Base of the pocket. So, you do not have to surgically raise the flap to remove it. It's not a periapical sealer that we are talking about, and a periapical surgery is needed. It's your excessive cement, which would still be in the cement, in the sulcus. So you can clean it with your debridement. So definitely mechanical debridement is needed, right? Now this early swelling after placement of crown and its loss of osseointegration due to some reason. No, it is not due to surgical or excessive occlusal loading. It is the irritation within the sulcus which led to the orthograde bone loss, right? MP, it was either cement or food impaction or injury from floss within the sulcus that caused the orthograde bone loss. The osteointegration lack or loss did not happen due to any technical or surgical or prosthetic error, right? See, this would be treated by specialist only. 6 mm probing depth, debridement was needed, and systemic antibiotics were required. This would be done by specialist. In the examination, the question may ask you, what is the treatment? You must know the treatment. So if the choices are given of choosing between your systemic antibiotics combined with debridement, right? Or your just mouth rinses, topical rinses. So you must at least know that a 6 mm pocket with the bone loss would require debridement and systemic antibiotics, right? And may or may not be requiring the surgical resection. That specialist will take the call. Again, systemic antibiotics in this case were given 6 mm probing depth, 5 mm or more, Lata. What did we learn? 5 mm or more probing depths associated with bone loss requires systemic antibiotic therapy plus resective or regenerative surgery. Yes or no, please? Lata, is that clear? So probing depth more than 5 mm, which is present here, 6 mm. Bone loss is seen. The mesial angular bone loss was around 2 mm, around the bone. So you would require local or systemic plus resective or your mechanical debridement treatment. See, if the refer to the specialist is given, the challenge is not there because you know you will refer. I am talking about where the option of referral to the specialist is not given. It's a no-brainer when the referral to specialist is given, we'll choose that, right, Zinath? Isn't that clear? Since beginning, I have been only talking about where the referral to the specialist options are not given, and question ask you what is the ideal treatment to educate the patient also. What will you tell the patient would be required? Even if you are not giving the treatment, ADC is still asking you what are the treatments required, yes or no? ADC is asking you for the periapical surgeries also, how to bypass instruments also, how to treat ameloblastomas, how to treat OKCs without giving the option of no specialist referral, because they want you to know that what treatment is needed, even if you're not doing it, right? Isn't that correct? ADC is giving you questions like that in pediatric patients where you're choosing the sedations or maybe under GA multiple treatment, multiple pulpotomies. You may not be doing it, but the exam is asking you questions that you know the treatment or not. And not all the questions have the referral to specialist option. So of course, what I'm talking about right now is where you don't have this option. Okay. Third case is 42-year-old male where there was again swelling on the one side. Implant was given 3 years ago and with the porcelain crown cemented to a ceramic abutment. And the pockets were 5 to 9 mm circumferentially, purulent discharge. Bone loss was seen up to the fifth implant thread. And comparison of the baseline radiograph was also seen. So that bone loss had taken place, confirming the diagnosis of peri-implantitis, right? So again, here, the combination of antibiotics were given and debridement was done. Flaps were raised, so surgical management, surgical debridement along with the mechanical debridement because there was excessive probing depth. And there was a local antibiotic delivery as well, local antiseptic delivery as well. So this is your severe case management. Ultimately, when they removed it, so this was the presenting case. Now you see the swelling in 1-1, the probing depths of 5 to 9 mm. And you see now vertical bone loss around both the sides. So loss of bone is severe in this case. Can you appreciate it? This was the baseline radiograph. But definitely if you compare the bone levels around the shoulder of the implant, can you see the amount of bone loss that has occurred here? So when they clinically exposed it for surgical debridement, they could see that up to the fourth thread, the threads were exposed. Can you see the exposed threads? And this is the tooth colored abutment here. Can you all appreciate the ceramic white tooth colored abutment here, which would be an aesthetic abutment over which the crown is given here? Can you clearly see the demarcation between the crown, abutment, and the implant fixture? After the surgical debridement, they sutured back, but due to the natural healing process, the shrinkage happened. Absolutely referral. There's no question about it, Lata. It's just that when the no specialist referral option is made, you must know for different probing depths and different bone losses, what are the managements? And these are getting asked now, right? So did now all these three case studies for 3 mm peri-implant mucositis, for 5 mm or 6 mm peri-implantitis, or up to 9 mm peri-implantitis. All the three severities and progression of the disease, the management differences, and knowing the treatment. You're not administering these surgeries, But knowing the treatment for peri-implant disease is now easily getting asked in exam. Are you fully equipped now? Because at Winspur, we don't go 60% or 100% prepared for the exam. Do we go 100% prepared for exam at Winspur? No, we go 200% prepared for exam. So that's what get you on the top 25 percentile. So if you want to be on the top percentile, these are the kind of deeper levels you must know and have the confidence. The level of confidence that will reflect when you enter the examination center, it will reflect through you. It will be, and it only comes through knowledge. There is nothing more empowering than knowledge. And I hope we continue to meet every week and gather more and more of the knowledge and gather more and more of the confidence. And yes, Kavya, we crack all the shades of gray. As we talk about, ADC gives you so many shades of gray in the options. You must know to identify all the shades of grays and all the shades of whites also. So when you're painting your house, you know the shades of whites, the kinds of shades of white that you get, totally sink into. That's exactly how ADC options are. But we learn with these concepts the eye to identify difference between each option, and there is no confusion at all. Other PDF article title says it's a good one for your flossing reference. So I use it for my internal classes also, for the Ultimate Advanced File classes, to teach about it's a UK article. It's although actually quite international article. It's from the International Journal, but it has a good reference for different probing techniques and again to study. I've taught this one in the Ultimate Advanced File, right? Peri-implant. Or this was also one of the power sessions in the previous batch. So if you go through my Facebook page, you will find a class on this article as well, actually. All right. So if you go to my Facebook page, actually, it's like an archive. You just keep scrolling, and there are such beautiful classes and articles covered there. For the enrolled candidates, this one is under the important classes, important article classes. So this article also I've covered in one of the classes, and I think it was public, so it must be on my Facebook page as well for those who are asking. I have covered this article also entirely, I think, as a power session, so you'll find it. All right, guys, thank you for being such a fabulous audience. I had amazing time teaching and learning with you. So thank you again so much. I'll see you on Thursday for our internal class, and we will actually complete the Ultimate Advanced File. Super excited for that as well. In the following 3 weeks, I will also cover in the 3 classes the X-ray mock discussion, because I know I threw you off your chairs when we launched that mock, and everybody was like, oof, what's that? And the X-ray mock, I knew. I'm very happy though that it was tough and you were thrown off and it took you by that surprise. It is actually what was desired, because I don't want you to face that in the examination, but rather be prepared for it. So get ready. After completing this week the Ultimate Advanced File, I'm planning 3 more sessions on X-ray mock discussion internally. And then internally on the fourth Thursday, I'm also planning to do the You Have Been After My Life for Orifice Barrier article and the overdenture implants article. So you know what's coming. I'm excited to also study those with you. And as a public session, again, a great announcement is that I am planning a public session on a very, very crucial concept of white patches in the mouth. So every time we get confused with frictional keratosis and the cancers and the leukoplakia and the, candidiasis, it's so confusing, right? And every oral medicine question is around that. So we are going to have one public session in coming weeks. I will announce the date and everything very soon. But it's the most exciting class. I am so excited that, yes, I keep telling my students in the internal class also that I can't believe we're like candy store when we talk about what articles we're doing next, what concepts you're doing next. And I hope we continue with the same enthusiasm and fun and learning. So when I see my kids in the slime lab, or when I see my kids in the candy store or Toys R Us, I have the same feeling when I'm with you here on Zoom. So this is our Toys R Us. This is our slime lab, and this is our candy store. When we do all these concepts for ADC, never thought that learning can be so much fun, but it really is when done in a right way. So thank you so much. Looking forward to meet you all on Thursday. We do our next important things. And yes, I'll see you on the WhatsApp. Keep sending me your doubts. Grishma, you send me an MCQ here. Please send it to my WhatsApp and I'll answer there. And yes, have a fabulous, fabulous night. Sleep well. Let all the concepts seep through in your head and get into your, subconscious and long-term memory so that they come extremely handy in examination. And I should stop talking now. Thank you so much. Have a fabulous night. Bye-bye. I'll see you Thursday.